Burn your vision board. Tear apart that polished 5-year plan you proudly wrote at the start of some hopeful January. Throw away the journals where you pleaded with the universe to grant you the life you imagined. Those rituals were never empowering you. They were quietly weakening you. They were training you to kneel before a future that does not exist yet. You were taught that success requires a perfect destination shimmering on the horizon, something distant and glorious that you chase with devotion. But pause for a moment and look honestly at your life. Look without excuses, without comforting illusions. Has the pursuit of that imagined destination made you stronger? Has it filled you with control and authority over your circumstances? Or has it left you anxious, restless, and dependent on outcomes that remain outside your control? For generations, people have been conditioned to believe that achievement begins with a dream written down on paper. Yet history repeatedly shows a different pattern. The individuals who truly shape events do not obsess over distant destinations. They develop methods. A goal is merely a wish dressed up in professional language. A method is a campaign. A goal hopes for victory. A method engineers it step by step, adapting to every shift in the battlefield. If you are exhausted from wishing, if you are tired of climbing ladders only to discover they were leaning against the wrong wall, then you are standing at the threshold of a far harsher but far more powerful truth. This is not a comforting philosophy designed to soothe insecurity. It is a philosophy of conquest over the self. Most people spend their entire lives suspended in a state of becoming. They are always waiting for something that has not yet arrived: the promotion, the relationship, the financial breakthrough, the perfect version of their body, the day when everything finally aligns. Their identity lives in the phrase "not yet." Because they exist in that endless postponement, the present moment becomes hollow. Their confidence is fragile because it depends on results that remain uncertain. One unexpected disruption, one sudden shift in circumstance, and their entire structure collapses. The reason is simple. They built their identity on a promise rather than on power. Reality itself is chaotic. Circumstances rise and collapse with little warning. When a person builds their life entirely around specific goals, they are constructing a house on the edge of a river that floods without mercy. The waters will rise eventually. They always do. And when they rise, the structure built upon hope will dissolve. But there is another approach. Instead of building fragile structures beside the river, you can become the current itself. Instead of anchoring your identity to fragile targets, you learn to cultivate positioning. Positioning transforms the entire game. When you understand positioning, the traditional language of success and failure becomes almost meaningless. You are no longer aiming at a single narrow outcome. Instead, you are expanding your capabilities, your influence, and your leverage in multiple directions simultaneously. Advancement becomes inevitable because every move strengthens your position. Yet to reach this level, you must destroy a certain comforting part of yourself. You must silence the voice that loves to dream publicly about what you will someday accomplish. That voice is addicted to applause and validation. In its place, you must awaken the strategist who demands results rather than fantasies. The transition is uncomfortable because it forces you to examine your life not as a story about personal fulfillment, but as a complex battlefield of forces and incentives. On a battlefield, hope is useless. Soldiers do not win because they wish for victory. They win because they maneuver with precision, because they read terrain, because they strike when opportunity appears. Strategy replaces sentiment. Discipline replaces fantasy. Consider why people write goals in the first place. Beneath the motivational language lies a simple emotional truth. A person writes a goal because they are dissatisfied with their current reality. They feel pain in the present moment, so they design a comforting future where that pain disappears. In this sense, a goal functions less like a map and more like a psychological anesthetic. It numbs the discomfort of the present by promising a better tomorrow. But anesthetics do not solve problems. They merely delay confrontation with them. When a person becomes obsessed with a distant objective, they often develop a dangerous form of tunnel vision. Their attention locks onto a single peak in the distance while ignoring the cliffs directly beneath their feet. Rigid focus may appear disciplined, yet rigidity in nature always leads to fracture. The strongest structures in the natural world are flexible ones. Think back to a moment when you invested enormous emotional energy into achieving a specific goal and then failed. The emotional crash was not simply disappointment. It felt like a collapse of identity itself. The reason was that your self-worth had become tied to an outcome that you could never fully control. You handed authority over your confidence to circumstances outside yourself. A strategist approaches life differently. Instead of declaring "I want wealth" or "I want recognition," the strategist examines the mechanisms that generate those outcomes. Skills of persuasion, control of valuable resources, influence within networks of decision-makers, and the ability to adapt quickly to changing environments, these are structural advantages. When a person builds these capabilities, they do not beg for results. They become the channel through which results naturally flow. This shift is the difference between wishing and restructuring reality. One approach depends on luck and timing. The other depends on preparation and leverage. When you delete your goals, you are not abandoning ambition. You are abandoning childish optimism in favor of strategic clarity. You begin to ask different questions. Where are the leverage points in my environment? Where am I wasting energy? Which skills would dramatically increase my influence? What structures can I build today that make certain outcomes nearly inevitable? At that moment, the dreamer fades and the architect emerges. The dreamer gazes endlessly at the horizon. The architect studies foundations. And in most lives, the foundation is weak because attention has been misdirected toward distant fantasies instead of present structures. Stop staring at distant peaks. Look at your hands, your habits, your networks, your daily systems. Those are the materials from which real power is constructed. But we live in an age where people feel compelled to announce every ambition the moment it enters their mind. A person declares that they are starting a business, beginning a fitness transformation, or building a new project long before any meaningful progress has occurred. These declarations spread across conversations and digital platforms, collecting validation from others who applaud the intention. Yet this habit quietly sabotages execution. The moment an ambition is publicly announced, two subtle forces emerge. First, the brain releases a surge of satisfaction simply from declaring the intention. The nervous system begins to treat the announcement as partial completion of the task. The result is a decrease in urgency. The hunger that should have fueled relentless action dissolves into complacent pride. Second, the announcement creates unnecessary resistance. Every stated ambition becomes a target for skepticism, envy, or quiet opposition. Some people consciously doubt the declaration, while others subconsciously hope it fails so they feel more comfortable with their own lack of progress. By announcing plans prematurely, individuals give potential obstacles a clear map of their intentions. A strategist moves differently. Silence becomes a form of protection. Rather than broadcasting every move, the strategist gathers information, builds capabilities, and positions themselves quietly. When results finally appear, they arrive suddenly and decisively, surprising everyone who assumed nothing was happening. Operating with a hidden agenda changes posture and perception. Instead of anxiously seeking recognition, you observe the environment with calm detachment. In conversations and meetings, you are no longer desperate to be noticed. You are studying incentives, alliances, weaknesses, and opportunities. Others sense the difference even if they cannot articulate it. Quiet confidence generates an aura of gravity. People become cautious around someone who speaks less yet seems to understand more. Energy that once leaked through constant discussion becomes concentrated into action. Talking about work provides emotional relief but produces no real transformation. Doing the work creates momentum. The world eventually hears the results whether you announce them or not. However, the most critical difference between dreamers and strategists appears when reality disrupts carefully laid plans. Life inevitably introduces illness, financial instability, betrayal, market changes, and countless unpredictable shocks. When a person's identity is anchored to a single goal, such disruptions feel catastrophic. The plan collapses, and with it collapses their confidence. A strategist interprets disruption differently. Chaos becomes raw material rather than an enemy. When circumstances change, the strategist simply reassesses terrain. The objective, greater power, independence, and control over one's life, remains constant. The path toward that objective evolves continuously. Imagine losing a job after years of effort within a specific organization. For someone defined by a rigid career goal, the loss appears like a devastating failure. Yet for someone trained to analyze positioning, the event becomes an unexpected liberation. Suddenly, there is freedom to enter industries previously ignored, to renegotiate priorities, to apply accumulated skills in environments with greater leverage. The same event produces opposite outcomes depending on mindset. This principle reflects a deeper truth about resilience. Structures built on fragile expectations shatter under stress. Structures built on adaptability strengthen when challenged. A small candle flame fears the wind because the wind extinguishes it. A large fire welcomes the wind because it intensifies the flames. Ask yourself a brutal question. If your current stability disappeared tomorrow, your job, your routines, your familiar environment, would you know how to rebuild quickly? If the answer is no, then your security depends too heavily on circumstances remaining unchanged. Real power lies in the ability to regenerate under pressure. History repeatedly demonstrates that adversity often becomes the catalyst for extraordinary influence. Individuals stripped of comfort sometimes produce their most impactful work precisely because constraints sharpen their thinking. Hardship can become ink with which new futures are written, but only if the person refuses to collapse into bitterness. Modern culture often encourages excessive gentleness toward personal weaknesses. Comfort is prioritized, discipline is softened, and the language of self-indulgence replaces the language of responsibility. Yet unchecked softness leads to stagnation. Progress requires internal authority. Consider the difference between loving yourself in a passive sense and respecting yourself through discipline. Passive self-love excuses every lapse. It allows sleep to replace effort, distraction to replace focus, indulgence to replace preparation. Discipline demands more. It requires you to confront the version of yourself that would happily waste years drifting through convenience. True self-respect emerges when you establish non-negotiable standards. You become both the ruler and the lawmaker of your own behavior. Certain principles become absolute. Complaints are replaced with analysis. Plans remain private until executed. Work occurs regardless of fluctuating mood. Paradoxically, strict discipline produces greater freedom. When you know that you can command yourself to perform difficult tasks without hesitation, you gain confidence that circumstances cannot easily control you. A person who cannot resist small temptations will struggle to navigate complex negotiations or high-pressure decisions. Mastery of the self becomes the foundation for mastery of environments. Once goals disappear from the center of your thinking, a different structure must replace them. That structure rests on three powerful principles: positioning, leverage, and adaptability. Together, they form a strategic method capable of navigating almost any environment. Positioning begins with a simple question that most people never ask. Instead of asking what you want to achieve, ask where you must stand. Outcomes are strongly influenced by environment. A person trying to accumulate wealth while remaining far from the flows of capital faces unnecessary friction. A person seeking influence while remaining outside networks of decision-makers limits their own reach. Positioning means deliberately moving yourself, physically, intellectually, and socially, into environments where the outcomes you desire occur naturally. If financial growth is your objective, then proximity to industries, markets, and conversations where money circulates becomes essential. Language, knowledge, and habits must evolve to match that environment. Success becomes less about heroic effort and more about intelligent placement. Leverage transforms effort into amplification. Traditional goal-driven thinking assumes progress occurs through direct labor. 1 unit of effort produces 1 unit of result. Strategic leverage multiplies impact. Technology, partnerships, systems, and networks allow a single decision to produce results far beyond individual capacity. Throughout history, influential figures rarely attempted to accomplish everything personally. They orchestrated resources, coordinated alliances, and directed energy toward decisive moments. The strategist continuously asks how existing structures can magnify effort. Instead of exhausting themselves in endless activity, they conserve strength for critical moves that shift entire landscapes. Adaptability completes the system. Every morning, the strategist studies the terrain again. Markets change, opportunities evolve, personal energy fluctuates, and new information appears. Plans must remain flexible enough to adjust. Rigidity traps people in outdated strategies simply because they fear abandoning earlier commitments. Adaptability resembles water flowing through terrain. When confronted with an obstacle, water does not argue with the rock. It moves around it, over it, or patiently erodes it. The direction changes, but the movement never stops. This attitude removes the emotional burden associated with failure. A delay is not defeat. It is simply time used to sharpen tools and reconsider angles of approach. As this mindset becomes habitual, a visible transformation occurs. Desperation fades. Instead of chasing outcomes with anxious intensity, you begin to project quiet certainty. Others sense stability in someone who operates through systems rather than impulses. In chaotic environments, The individual with a method becomes a point of calm gravity. While others obsess over their distant 5-year plans, you focus on constructing durable structures in the present. Skills compound. Relationships deepen. Influence accumulates quietly. Over time, these elements form the architecture of an empire far more stable than any single goal. Every action becomes deliberate. Silence becomes strategic rather than awkward. Even setbacks reveal patterns that guide future maneuvers. Each obstacle teaches geometry, the calculation of new angles from which progress becomes possible again. This path is not comfortable. It requires independence of thought and a willingness to abandon comforting illusions. Many people prefer the emotional pleasure of dreaming about future success rather than the demanding work of engineering it. But those who accept the discipline of strategy gain something rare: control over their own trajectory. No external rescue will arrive to deliver your ambitions. No perfectly written list of goals will transform your life on its own. Transformation occurs when you claim authority over your decisions, your habits, and your environment. Guard the throne of your mind carefully. Old habits will attempt to return. The temptation to chase easy validation will reappear. Watch these impulses with the same vigilance a ruler uses to monitor potential rebellions. Maintain control. When you operate through positioning, leverage, and adaptability, the world stops feeling like an unpredictable enemy. It becomes terrain, complex, shifting, but navigable. Instead of begging reality for permission, you engage it directly. You maneuver through it, shape it, and sometimes even bend it. At that point, ambition stops being a fragile dream. It becomes a force guided by strategy. You move forward not because you hope for success, but because your structures make advancement increasingly inevitable.